It's always difficult to get the people's attention after nice tea break and coffee break, but we'll try. We have a very exciting session, and we have three great panelists. We have virtually we are joined by Mr. Navdeep Suri. Ambassador Suri was actually serving in Egypt as ambassador for India, and he lived in Egypt for a while. I'm saying things that are not on his CV, but he told me about it when we spoke a couple of days ago. He speaks a little Arabic too, so if you have a question in Arabic, he might also be able to answer it. His Excellency, Mr. Navdeep, has a 36 years long career in Indian Foreign Service. He served in India's diplomatic mission in Cairo, Damascus, Washington, Dar es Salaam, and London. He was India's Consul General in Johannesburg, High Commissioner to Australia, and Ambassador to Egypt, the UAE. He holds a master's degree in economics. So he comes with a big wealth of cultural information and economic information as well. The other panelist, Mr. Rachid Benjelloun, a good old friend of mine. He's a chief of party at the USAID Trade Reform and Development in Egypt. He's been here for a couple of years. This is his second sejour in Egypt. Rachid is currently works for the USAID for reform and development in Egypt, implemented by Palladium International. Previously, he was deputy head of trade and logistics in Nathan Associates. Last panelist, and actually very important one, is Consul Rania Abdel Meguid. Consul Rania is currently Director of General International Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Previously, she was a head of the WTO team in the mission of Egypt in Geneva. Abdel Meguid is a career diplomat with a spectrum of expertise in multinational, multilateral economic affairs, including sustainable development, trade, debt, and finance. She earned her BA from University of Alexandria in 1999. I don't know that how can she accomplish all this in this short career period. But the topic of our session today is a very exciting one. It's very difficult to have handheld microphone and flip the papers. The title of our session is Catalyzing Trade and the Connectivity. After all the technical issues that we heard about the transition and the environment and the just and this and that, I think nothing is going to happen without trade. Because trade basically moves goods from point A to point B. And without that, no value is added. If we are in isolated islands, there will be no trade, there will be no growth, there will be no interaction, there will be no cultural dissemination. So trade really is very, very important. And the international trade system suffers a lot of problems these days. I would like to start with our friend Rania to talk to us about. I have two questions for her. I will jot the two questions now, and we'll see if she can cover these questions in 10 minutes. And we'll give each speaker 10 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for questions and answers. Can you help us, Rania, to understand the world trade landscape these days? How complex it is, and the working, if is it working, and if it's not, why? Why not? And then how to fix the WTO and the expansion of trade in the global scene is depending on the multilateral trade system, if we can fix it or save it. So please go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. First, thank you, Mohamed and Dr. Abdel, for the kind invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you and your distinguished guest participants. As you said, I will be tackling the complexity of the global trade landscape and the centrality of the role of the WTO in this regard. So I'll get it from the multilateral perspective. Trade is perceived as the engine for global economic growth and development of developing countries. Stability and predictability conditions are very important for the expansion of trade. And WTO, the Organization for World Trade Organization, should be the guarantor of such conditions. If we look to the landscape nowadays of the global trade, you find it very complex. It's facing unprecedented challenges. One of these unprecedented challenges is uncertainty. Uncertainty of the scope, time frame of the global over-cascading crises and potential ones, when it will happen and how it will be, from pandemics, outbreaks, food security, energy security, and perhaps cyber attacks. So this in turn put negative effects on the trade as well as other dominant elements nowadays, like high inflation, high interest rates, escalated geopolitical tensions, and others. This led to downgrade in global trade economic growth, transformation of supply chains from efficiency to resilience, and retreat from global cooperation on the level of trade. For the perspective of the future, or in the future of trade nowadays, we'll find it on the short term, it has made some recovery, but it's still poor. For the forecasts of 2023, we'll find that it will grow, trade growth will grow by 0.8, that is down of 1.7 that was projected last April. And for 2024, the growth rate is expected to be 3.3%, nearly unchanged from what was expected in April, that is 3.3%. However, for the future of trade, it's going to be on services, and that is for technologies. Technological advancements, transformation of trade to digital trade and green transition will be a priority for the coming period. Technological advancement will impact profoundly the scope, the time frame, and the speed by which the trade is expanding, and as well as changing dramatically the distinction between service and trade and merchandise trade. And they are even changing or reshaping the patterns of trade flow faster than the trade policies can adopt and policymakers can. So within all this, what is the role of the WTO? What's going on with the WTO? WTO, like the global trade landscape, is facing unprecedented challenges as well as chronic imbalances in its vital functions, in its three vital functions. These are the negotiating function, the dispute settlement function, and the deliberative function. For any system, any legal system to be healthy and efficient, it needs a balance between the legislative system and the judicial function. For the WTO, this means a balance between the negotiating function and the dispute settlement function. For the negotiating function, over the last few years, it has been suffering from a weakening role due to the lack of political will and drive from member states to further liberalize trade in a way that encompasses all the interests of all its members. So the result was an outdated rule book that is totally ineffective today. The case was the opposite for the dispute settlement. It gained strength over time by the built-in automaticity of the system, because we have no negotiating process that's functioning. When people say, when you don't negotiate, you litigate. So leaving only the option for the countries at the WTO to view and consider their trade concerns with a dispute settlement. Until recently, we got this problem of the stalled appellate body due to its vacancies, and US blocking the appointment of these vacancies. Also, the WTO is facing the demise of its deliberative function. There is the function for following up the administrative and the obligation of the countries to their agreements of the WTO. So the result was that the deviation from the countries and even the big players from the multilateral system, from the multilateral agreements to plurilateral agreements, bilateral and regional agreements. This in itself weakened the role of the WTO and the multilateral trading system. And of course, this hurts all the countries, the least and developing countries, but those who are dependent on the security of the global trade rules are the hardest hit, like Egypt and other developing countries. So the way out or the way forward is people are talking nowadays about the dire need for the reforming the process of the WTO. There is a big agreement around the member states of the WTO that there is a need to do this, but they are not in agree on which steps to be taken to do this. It's unlikely to reach an agreement on these steps in the near future, but we can say that if we need a deliverable outcome on the reform process, we need some fundamentals. We need it to be through a negotiating process that is inclusive, transparent, and member-driven, and to keep into account the fundamental principles of the WTO, that is like the SDT, for example, special differential treatment for LDCs and developing countries, and to preserve the credibility of the WTO as the sole negotiating platform for setting rule-based trade internationally, and most importantly, to preserve or to strengthen the multilateral trading system. So let me conclude here by saying that the future of trade is in service and the transformation of technological, digital, and green trade. So our economy is depending to how extent we're going to transfer our trade. And the second, we need desperately a reform to the WTO, but the reform should not be about the future of the WTO rather than the WTO of the future. An organization that's fit for purpose, that is capable of facing the challenges of the 21st century. So let me stop here, mindful of the time for the time being.
Thank you, Rania. I think this is... If you can't negotiate, litigate. So that's the conclusion. The road for reform is very tough, and we really don't have any clear playbook to go with it, that reform. I don't know the microphone. It's yeah. We'll go now to our next panelist. In light of what Councillor Rania explained to us, do you see the multilateralism as relevant today? Is it fading out? Do we have a replacement for multilateralism? Can we fix multilateralism? Does the major players in the world believe in multilateralism anymore? So these are many questions that I'm throwing at you, and may perhaps you can also shed some light on how trade policy and multilateral framework could address the growing climate change concerns and challenges. All in 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mohamed Bey. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with such a distinguished group of panelists and participants here. I want to give special thanks to Dr. Abdel, who is another excellent friend, and we've been doing some work together recently that's been outstanding. I'll discuss it a little bit here, and congratulations on the 30th anniversary of ECES as well. So, in answer to all of Mohamed Bey's questions, the answer is yes. And we can all go home now. No, I think I'll refer back to what Mr. Tariq Tawfiq was saying earlier, that there's more regional trade agreements, more push towards regional trade agreements. This has been the case for decades. This has not actually weakened the need for the multilateral trading system. Just the opposite. In fact, if you look at almost all the regional trade agreements that were negotiated, that are being implemented, at their core are all the principles of the WTO. In fact, even some of the chapters in these regional trade agreements are copy and paste from WTO agreements like SPS, TBT, talking about the positive and negative lists for trade and services, even borrowing things from the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO. So one reinforces the other, and without a strong multilateral trading system, even the regional trade agreements would not be where they are today. Having said that, I would say that I'm maybe a little bit worried, not about the multilateral trading system so much. There are trends going on in the world. We won't go too much into them, but there's socioeconomic, socio-cultural type of trends, trends against immigration, against foreign products. Again, not to go back to politics, but recent elections in Netherlands, in Italy, even in the US and other places, there are Argentina, that's right. There are some trends out there that are pushing against multilateralism, and those trends don't seem to be going away. If I'm a policymaker, and I'm been here on my second tour, as Mohamed Bey said, I've been here for maybe two years or so, and looking at the policymaker's dilemma, whether in Egypt or elsewhere. And as a policymaker, there's a shortage of foreign exchange, here in Egypt and in other places, for reasons that we won't go into, but interest rates are, have to increase to reduce inflation, which sucks all the flows out of emerging markets, causing issues with currencies, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're a policymaker, you're trying to increase exports in order to bring in foreign exchange. At the same time, you're trying to reduce foreign exchange use by reducing your imports. And how are you going to increase your exports if you're also trying to essentially be at war with imports? It just doesn't work that way. This equation does not quite compute. So I want to go back and say that the multilateral trading system, what I feel one of the really nice things that we've inherited from this multilateral trading system are some core pillars, maybe slightly different from what Rania was talking about. Rania talked about the special and differential treatment and such things. There's also national treatment, MFN, and all those things. But I want to talk about three things that we've learned, three principles, core principles that we learned from the multilateral trading system, that I would say that regardless of where policymakers are looking, whether they're looking WTO, regional trade agreements and whatnot, if we're trying to ensure that trade is supporting growth policies, then we have to look at these three principles, and I'll talk about them each in turn. So the first is simplification. We have to, and I'm sure Dr. Abdel has heard me mention these three pillars. They are an ongoing theme for us on the project, on where we're pushing towards reform. So simplification. I think if you're an exporter, and I was talking to an exporter just recently, just outside during Amina during the coffee break, we meet a lot of entrepreneurs who are trying to get into the export field, and they are just faced with a mass of bureaucracy and administrative obstacles. If we're trying to expand exports like we are here in Egypt and elsewhere, as I said, we are at maybe $32 billion worth of annual non-petroleum goods exports. We were trying to be at $100 billion a year. We can't get there with just trying to expand the current exporters' exports. We have to be able to bring in new exporters, and we have to help existing exporters as well. How do you do that with complicated bureaucracies, administrative obstacles? It just cannot be. So simplification is critical. I'll give a really good examples, and this is not just because Dr. Abdel is here. ECES, and I see some of the team from ECES that did the work led by Dr. Abdel. We did this thing called the business process analysis. So business process analysis essentially takes the current export and import process. We did this for 8 different product groups, 4 on the export side, 4 on the import side. And we said, okay, let's look at the as-is processes, like the journey, the marathon, the fight that an exporter and importer has to go through in order to fulfill export and import requirements. And it's quite the journey. All these reports and booklets are available from the ECES website, and I'm sure the team would be happy here to give to you. But it's scary. You look at all the steps, the length of time that it takes, the cost of what it takes. It's very scary. I don't see how we would get to $100 billion or even $50 billion if we pursue such steps. So doing these business process analysis has provided us with a list of very specific processes that we can reform. So again, regardless of whether we're talking WTO, regional trade agreements, none of that matters if we're not trying to simplify our export and import processes. Second thing I want to talk about. So, you know, I should say that I was just talking to Mr. Tawfiq as well, outside in his capacity with the Federation of Egyptian Industries. Actually, Mr. Mohamed Kassem is also the head of the Foreign Trade Policies Committee of the Federation. One great thing is that the reform aspects of the BPA outcomes have now been incorporated into. It's such a big thing, yeah. Even the microphone got scared.
It's an alarm.
So those critical reform areas have been incorporated into FEI's reform agenda. This goes to the Prime Minister, to the President, and so hopefully we will see some reform, inshallah. We're counting on you, Dr. Mohamed. The second pillar I'll want to discuss is transparency. So simplification, then transparency. And I mentioned simplification first because ideally you want to simplify the processes before, you know, you show the traders and, you know, what the processes are. Transparency is critical. I know it's cliche. I know everybody knows transparency is good. We want to see it. One of the best practices out there is to have these trade information portals. A lot of countries these days funded World Bank, ITC, self-funded. Actually, the best trade information portal you'll see is self-funded, and it's Mauritius. That's my favorite. And it's called Mauritius Trade Easy. As an exporter or an importer, you go to this platform, you choose export. I want to export X or import Y, and it tells you all the procedures. Not just the tariffs, not just the taxes, fees, but all the process. These are all the licenses and permits, certificates, everything that you have to fulfill in order to export or import. It's not easy. I guarantee you, I've been fortunate enough to lead this process in one country and support another. It's not easy, and the most difficult part is actually bringing these agencies, all the border agencies together in one room and deciding that we are going to provide all the information that's necessary that makes it clear for an exporter and importer what they need to do. To have them with the private sector sitting together, agreeing for a process going forward. Hasn't happened here. It has happened in other countries. It needs to take place. This is a core principle of transparency. The third one is predictability. So simplification, transparency, predictability. And what I mean by that is if you're a policymaker and you're thinking, okay, I want to grow my exports. Well, first step is, you know, before issuing any, let's say, new fees, $100 on you know, if you're going to use NAFESA for this or that, or whatever new policy you have in mind, well, let's put ourselves in the shoes of the traders. And are we making, by issuing a such regulation or a policy, are we making it more complicated or making it easier for the trader to do business? So what are some of those things? So some of the best practices is before you issue a new regulation, you let the public know about it. You know, have a public hearing, at least publish the draft regulation on some website, allow time for traders to be able to comment. Then there is a discussion, there is a public-private dialogue, an interagency process, where some leadership is needed, usually by the trade ministry.
Sounds like a dream.
You know, it sounds like a dream. It's happening in several of the countries that I've worked in. It's not impossible. It's difficult. It's difficult, but it can happen. It needs to happen. Before this regulation is issued, obviously you have all these discussions. Once you're clear what you want to do, then you are providing traders time to be able to adjust their processes, because there are contracts that are ongoing, shipments that are ongoing. So you want to give a certain period of time to let traders adjust to the process. So this is the third pillar. And this is an answer essentially to the first question, which is, you know, multilateral trading system, obviously great. It is the core of what we're talking about. But whether we are, you know, we love WTO, don't love the WTO, whatever it is that we're pursuing, export-led growth is very important. In order to do that, you need to meet these core principles that we're talking about. So, can the multilateral trade framework help answer some questions on climate change concerns? And I think, you know, over the years, usually the answer is, well, trade policy can help address some of the issues with, or help to move environmental goods and services. So maybe reduce tariffs or non-tariff measures on environmental goods and services. So this is usually a good place to start. You know, how does this help? Well, you also have trade can promote economies of scale. So if you're producing windmills or electric vehicles or whatnot, you know, if you're producing just for your market or a few hundred people, you have much better market or much greater markets through trade. So again, in theory, you have economies of scale, reduces the cost, and you know, reduces greenhouse gas emissions. I want to read just a couple of statistics along those lines, and this is just happens to be last week's Economist magazine. So about 40%, so this is an MIT study, it says about 40% of the recent decline in solar power costs, which was discussed this morning, can be attributed to scale economies. Another study says that if trade in solar photovoltaic modules had been restrictive over the preceding decade, prices in 2020 would have been 54% higher in China and 100% higher in America. So again, this is the argument for specialization, the economies of scale, etc. The other argument for specialization is, you know, if your country produces a lot of clean energy, then it should specialize. Again, this is comparative advantage. It has its pros and cons. But you know, if you have access to a lot of clean energy, in theory, if you're producing energy-intensive goods, then you have some advantage in that, and you are able to export, and you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the process. I want to add, maybe I'm almost wrapping up, that COP28, so which is starting I think tomorrow, right? Yep. So in this during COP28, the WTO is gonna have a trade day. They're gonna talk about trade policy tools that countries can use. And we've heard some of those arguments already this morning from Elena, from Tariq Bey, and from some of our colleagues. I'm just going to read them out to you. So, repurposing environmentally harmful subsidies. So I think it was Elena that was talking about, was it 7, did she say trillion? Some horrendous number of fossil fuel subsidies. So, you know, repurposing these harmful subsidies. Rebalancing tariff policies that place higher import duties on low carbon products and on carbon intensive goods. Using the $13 trillion in annual government procurement spending to jumpstart markets for emissions reducing goods and services, cooperation on carbon pricing and green subsidies, and making food systems more secure and sustainable. So I mean, this is what the WTO is going to be outlining during COP28. I'll say one final thing is, you know, one very practical use of trade policy. Everybody's going to start to see, if they haven't seen already, where countries start to impose, you know, taxes like carbon taxes or start to issue systems like CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism that the EU issued earlier this year. It's still a bit vague to me. I'm sure there are much better experts on this than I am. But this will have a real impact on exports. And the objective is good. The objective is clear of things like CBAM. But it's a trade policy that will impact exporters, including here in Egypt. So the first few products, like fertilizer and cement and steel and things like that, these are all things that we would export. Over the next 3 years, there will be registration processes. We will need to be able to measure greenhouse gas emissions. We need to be able to know what they are so that the European importer, when they import this stuff, they can declare it and pay or not pay carbon tax on it. So trade policy will have very real, very practical impacts. I don't have, unfortunately, all the answers to Mohamed Bey's questions, but definitely a space to be looking out for in the next few years.
Thank you, Rachid. I think you covered a lot of territory, but the most important thing, the 3 pillars, simplification, transparency, and the predictability. It's easier said than done. Particularly your idea is to bringing all the culprits in one room. I thought you wanted to kill them all. Because they will never agree on what we want them to agree on. But thank you for this elaboration. I saved the best for last. Ambassador Suri is joining us from India, and I would like him to address the issue of the global value chain, the GVC, how resilient it is. It has the COVID-19 and the Ukraine war had wreaked havoc in the global value chain. How could we make it more resilient, or what dynamics is going to affect the development of the global value chain in the near future? Perhaps I would throw another question at you, since you are in India. During the G20, there were talk about a new India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. What are the prospects of this corridor, and what impact it will have on the established corridors, be it the Suez Canal in Egypt or the Belt and Road of China that has 177 countries signed up for it? Please, Ambassador Suri.
Thank you very much, Mohamed Bey. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, we hear you clear.
Thank you. And I also want to add my congratulations to Dr. Abdel and to ECES for their 30th anniversary. And I would be remiss if I didn't start by acknowledging several of my friends who are in the audience. I saw Dr. Ziad Bahayuddin, who's a very dear friend. I saw Manal Abdel Manem, and I know Dr. Amr Musa, His Excellency Amr Musa, is also coming in the next session. So just greetings to them. I've spent 2 terms in Egypt, very my heart. I thought that apart from global value chains and the resilience that is to be built, the session we are speaking on is trade and connectivity, and of course the corridor that you spoke about also comes in the context of connectivity. But there is one other element, perhaps, which is missing from the equation, and that is investment. So let me try and briefly touch upon each of these. And if I can take the liberty of from the global conversations that we've had all morning, to mixing a bit of local with the global as well, because I think since it's India and Egypt having this conversation in a global context, I think it's important that we also look at our relationship and how we can take it to the next level. And I say this because 2023 has truly been an exceptional year for our ties. We started off by hosting President Sisi as chief guest on our Republic Day. Then the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, came to Egypt. Then we again hosted President Sisi for the G20. Egypt was our special guest for G20. And of course, now Egypt is also a member of the expanded BRICS group. So I think at the highest political level, there's a kind of impetus today to our relationship, which is perhaps missing for the last couple of decades. And there's a lot of making up for lost time that we need to do. And I say this because, you know, we can be very happy with the fact that last year trade grew by 60%, but still $7.5 billion. And I hope we can sustain the growth that we saw last year. But really, it isn't enough for two large economies to have this level of trade. And that's why I do want to bring in the aspect of investment, because, you know, this is something that has been debated over and over, right? Whether trade follows investment or investment follows trade, or whether the two go together and in what shape or form. But I can tell you from our experience that we have about 50 odd Indian companies that have invested in Egypt, and several of them are exporting significant amounts from Egypt, materials like PVC and caustic soda and carbon black and paints and flex films and so on, in addition to addressing the Egyptian market. So I guess the more investments that we can get into Egypt from countries like India, the stronger will be the trade flows. And yes, Egypt has come a long ways in terms of addressing the common problem that India and Egypt share, which is millennia-old bureaucracy. But my friends in Egypt certainly tell me that things are getting better. I think the single biggest problem that they currently face is the shortage of dollars, and even new investors are sometimes, in my conversations with them, kind of wary that, you know, I'm willing to put in money. I like the IRR, I like the profitability and all, but how do I get my money out? And how do I repatriate profits and so on? So I'm sure the government's working on it. I should add that I was also very encouraged with my meetings with the Suez Canal Economic Zone people when they came to India just before President Sisi's visit. And I think it's such a great opportunity, between the location, the competitive labor rates that you have, the network of free trade agreements that you have, that it could really become a magnet for Indian pharmaceutical companies, automotive components companies, others areas in which we have a comparative advantage. But I think there's perhaps a need to market it much more aggressively and over a sustained period of time. On a question, Mohamed Bey, about global value chains, at one level, COVID-19 exposed the fragility of the global value chains, and it also exposed the fact that while many of us were cheerleaders of globalization, we weren't quite prepared for the centralization of globalization that we saw in the last couple of decades, and suddenly the perils of that centralization were exposed. And so what we start hearing today are new and interesting expressions. We talk to many countries and many large corporates, and many of them are talking about a China +1 or a China ++ strategy. And certainly India is benefiting from that. iPhones, the iPhone 15 being made in India and being exported to other countries, I think is the case in point, where you can see as a major company that's making actually the shift into India with of its manufacturing. And I think this is a trend that's going to grow significantly in the coming decade. the US administration has been talking openly about friendshoring. There's the whole conversation about trusted suppliers and so on. And I think those, all of those are elements that, whether we agree with them or not ideologically, but from a purely pragmatic position, countries like India, countries like Egypt are well positioned to benefit from the shifts that are taking place before our eyes. And certainly in India, we hear of a company every week that is looking to move some of its manufacturing at least. And states within India are aggressively competing with each other to see who can attract these new investors that are coming in. Which brings me to the final point of the connectivity and corridors. And you mentioned a very telling figure that about the BRI and the number of countries that have joined up. India wasn't one of them, mostly for geopolitical reasons, including the fact that a small section of the corridors was running through Indian territory. But I think it's also significant that some countries are now leaving that corridor as well. Italy was the last one to, I think, say that it had concerns. And which brings me to not just the issue of trade corridor, but trying to reimagine corridors in a larger, broader sense, perhaps a fit for purpose for the 21st century rather than a mercantile version of a previous century. And if you look at it from that perspective, I think the proposed India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor that was announced on the sidelines of G20 becomes a lot more interesting. Because while initial attention has been mostly focused on the transport connectivity, actually there are three other key components, and I want to highlight those first. So if everybody's talking today about data as the new oil, then you need high-speed, secure, trusted data pipelines. And that's one of the first components of the India, Middle East, Europe corridor project. And I think if it comes into place, it could really boost the export of India's IT services beyond its current level of $250 billion a year to much larger numbers, considering how well positioned we are for that. The second aspect is something that the Prime Minister of India has been talking about for a while in the context of the International Solar Alliance. And he's been saying about one sun, one word, one grid. But basically talking about the interconnectivity of regional grids in a way that renewable energy can move from one part to the other part of the world, presumably with the movement of the sun, so that you don't need to invest stratospheric amounts into storage of that energy. The third component is potentially pipelines to move ammonia from green hydrogen. And again, knowing that Europe with its climatic conditions is probably going to remain deficit in green hydrogen, and it's countries like India or Egypt or Saudi Arabia or others which can be major exporters of this new and emerging product as the prices of that come down. And the fourth really is the component of transport of goods in a physical sense. And the corridor envisages a connect between the west coast of India, UAE, potentially Saudi Arabia, and on a railroad from Saudi Arabia, which is mostly in place already today, to the border with Jordan, and then some 300 kilometers needed through Jordan, through Israel, and on to Haifa. Now, I understand that with all of the geopolitics that has erupted in the region, the kind of aggression that Israel is showing, the kind of sentiment in the region, this might seem like a pie in the sky. But the way I look at it, it's a long-term project. It ain't happening today, it ain't happening tomorrow. Meetings are supposed to take place once things calm down a bit to put the detailed project together. And I think that there's an opportunity here, particularly for countries like Egypt, which is we need to start reimagining corridors from north-south to east-west. Global trade is shifting. The 80% of global growth is coming from the south. And so the traditional colonial patterns of north-south trade, I think, are going to shift and are already shifting. And so it's important for us to reimagine trade corridors or economic corridors like the Middle East Europe corridor as also flowing east-west. And Egypt, of course, is a natural bridge between Asia and Africa. And there's no reason why Egypt can't take advantage of its location, create another spur of the corridor, and see it as complementary to its ambitions rather than something that is competitive. So allow me to stop here and look forward to hearing from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think your alluded to investment, and this is very important point. I don't think I would be revealing a secret when I said when I took the chairmanship of Egyptian Exporters Association, I said there is no exports without production, and there is no production without investment. So we have to link exports with investment. This is why we created the concept of invest for exports, and that's a discussion we might have later on after that session. But I think the idea of putting investment or injecting investment into the global value chain is very, very important. The other point you stressed is interconnectivity, and without this interconnectivity, trade will never happen. And this interconnectivity will only happen when we fix the multilateral trade system and make it more resilient and more effective than what it is right now. With that, I think we'll open the floor for questions. Please. Please introduce yourself, and if you want to address the question to a particular panelist, please mention that.
هو أنا اسمي محمد منصور، باحث قانون في وزارة المالية. هو أنا المشكلة عندي في تحفيز التجارة العالمية هو الصراع اللي بين المنتج والموزع. يعني المنتج البني في جنوب أمريكا بيصارع من أجل البقاء، في حين ان الموزع البني في امريكا في الولايات المتحده بيحقق مليارات الدولارات، وده بيسبب الهجره الغير شرعيه ومشاكل الهجره ومعالجتها. برضو شركه زي امازون بتحقق مليارات من التوزيع، في حين ان بقيه عوامل الانتاج الاخرى بتعاني من تكلفه الانتاج وسوء توزيع الثروه. المشكله اللي محتاجين نناقشها وتبقى في تركيز عليها هي حاجتين: السياسات الحمائيه، والحاجه الثانيه سياسات التوزيع واعاده التوزيع. اذا احنا كلامنا في البندين دول هنعالج مشاكل كتير في عمليه توزيع.
شكرا. I will take some more questions and then the panelists will address them one by one. Please.
السلام عليكم. هو حضرتك أيهما أهم، التصدير للداخل أم التصدير للخارج؟
مين حضرتك؟
سراج رشدي. التصدير للداخل أهم أم التصدير للخارج؟ التصدير للداخل أقصد بيه إن إحنا نقفل محبس الاستيراد، وبدل ما ندور على إن إحنا نصدر، إن ننتج الحاجة، يبقى في الحالة دي صدرنا للداخل. شكرا حضرتك.
أنت بتتكلم على ما يسمى إحلال الواردات، ودي سياسة عفى عليها الزمن. اتفضل. هنا. اوكي، هنا وبعدين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. احمد الصافي، خبير نموذج التميز الاوروبي كاف، مستشار مؤسسه كيدي زد الاداره العامه والحوكمه المصريه الاجتماعيه بالنمسا. الحقيقه سؤال موجه للدكتور رشيد بمناسبه انه موجود في مصر من فتره وبيدير شويه مشروعات بالنسبه للبيروقراطيه والاصلاح في الاجراءات. الحقيقه ده استفسار وحاجه مطروحه يمكن الواحد بيسمعها وبيتكلم فيها منذ كنت 30 40 سنه. انا عايز اعرف بالظبط دلوقتي ايه المحور الرئيسي او النقطه الرئيسيه اللي عامله فجوه كبيره جدا ما بين الاجراءات وما بين تشجيع الاستثمار في مصر. شكرا.
Thank you. A very quick question. How do you view the potential complementarity between the Africa Free Trade Agreement on the one hand and the new initiative about this Indo-Pacific corridor that goes through the Middle East till Europe?
Hello, hi, Maha Abdel Nasser. Well, actually, Dr. Rashid, the three pillars you are talking about, as I said, it's like a dream. But while you are here and you are working on that, the question is, do you really see this is happening, or it is on the way to happen somewhere, sometime or not?
Progress report.
Yes. The other thing, actually, Mr. Ambassador, well, he already talked about what I was going to talk about, the interconnectivity, because I think this is the most important thing now, the data cables and the fiber cables that are carrying data across the world, which Egypt actually has a very good advantage in that. We hold the main traffic from west to east. I hope that they will not lose that to any other competitor, because there was some project called Bypass. They were trying to do another route for the interconnectivity. The other thing about moving the green hydrogen and the energy, I guess this will be actually the real new trade. If we're going to have solar farms across the country, how are we going to export this energy? Without having this in place, I don't think that we will go nowhere in the energy trade in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions? If no more questions, then we'll start. Okay, next question here.
Thank you. My name is Manal Abdel Manem. I'm purely private sector and mainly in agribusiness and green agribusiness in Africa. I have a question for Dr. Rachid for USAID. We know that we're trying to make a lot of free trade arrangement and help the African countries, especially, to export more. Do you think that the USAID, when they have implemented some of their policy, they sanction some of the countries when they have just internal internal laws that purely govern their social? I refer to the last USAID sanctioning Uganda and taking Uganda out of AGOA. And this has nothing to do with the trade or international relation. It has to do something purely national, domestic, social, which happened also in other countries, and there was no sanction. I mean, like in Doha, they had almost similar laws. Supreme Court of India recently, they have enforced the non-sexual, I mean, not one-sex marriage, and there has no been sanction. So there are some discriminations when it comes to really developing countries, where they are in need of USAID to open the market, and the need for the green transformation, and they don't understand why the interference in the domestic laws with trade. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll get response from the moderators. Rania? Sorry, from the panelists, not me.
Okay, I'll try to address these questions in very few comments. The first one was the weakened multilateral system and the unilateral measures that we are witnessing nowadays, like CBAM, Dr. Rachid was talking about. Egypt will be one of the 5 most affected countries by this unilateral measure. These new protectionist tendencies pose new challenges to the multilateral system and to the WTO itself, because it's unable nowadays to tell us to what extent these measures go in conformity with its rules and regulations. So this is another challenge adding to what we have right now. And we are engaged in restructuring and reforming the multilateral trading system, but this is a long-term process. We need to work on ourselves. We need to prepare for neutral climate future. We need to have our own carbon markets. We need to have our own carbon certificates. But it's easy to say than said, so it's hard. This is one of the most important things that I would like to address. The others was mainly for Dr. Rachid. Thank you.
Okay. Rachid.
Thank you so much.
You will carry the burden of answering all the questions.
I'll answer some. I'm not sure that I understood all of them. We can go back and seek maybe explanations. But on the last one, I mean, just to address the USAID issue, I don't represent USAID, and I don't represent US government. I work for Palladium. It's a contractor. We are the ones implementing, so I can say nothing actually about that. So that's easy enough.
It's a good answer.
Yeah, that's easy enough. Best, let me put on my personal hat. Nobody, I don't know who else is listening to this, but I'll say that I've been around actually. One of my very first assignments was to Zambia. It was 25 years ago or so, and we couldn't let the Sudan into the room. This was again a while back. My comment will be a bit different. I think so. What you're referring to with Uganda is they can no longer benefit from AGOA preferences into the U.S. because of their policies on homosexuality, etc. Again, I won't comment on whether the policy is right or wrong. Not my place. But it's not that Ugandan companies cannot export to the U.S. They can. They just would not benefit from those particular AGOA preferences. There are only maybe 3 other countries, I can't remember how many, the Central African Republic and maybe others. So trade can still happen on the one hand, and secondly, we have a lot more to talk about than about preferences. I mean, this is my issue when we talk about regional trade agreements or the WTO system. We can use any of these as, we say, the boogeyman. You know, somebody out there is controlling me. When actually, as I said, with the 3 principles, those are things entirely under our control. I go back to Uganda. I used to spend a lot of time in Uganda. I love the country. And I've shaken hands with the president, actually. They have a lot of other issues. You know, let's not blame the boogeyman out there for blocking trade. There are a lot bigger issues that Uganda should be dealing with that are not dealing with. So I will keep it at that for now. For the question from the gentleman, it was about investment, and I work more on the trade side of things. But I would say whether it's for investment or for trade, I think for investment, you know, just from and there are much better experts in the room on investment. But I would say one of the things that as an outside observer on investment is that there's always this focus on incentives, and this was, I think, a discussion this morning. I can't remember who was talking about it. The race to the bottom. I think it was Dr. Ziad. Now that I remember, Dr. Ziad talked about this race to the bottom. It's reducing environmental standards. Let's reduce taxes. Let's give a tax holiday for 10 years. Let's not care about labor, who we employed, what age, and all of that. When I go back to all the fundamental principles. We want investment. we want trade. Let's have an environment that's conducive to investment and to trade. Do we have the right skilled labor? Do we have the right infrastructure, the logistics, the transport systems? Those things are much more fundamental. Now, for the BPA, and Dr. Abla's mind is much fresher than mine, there were a lot of priorities that were talked about. I'll mention one, and I'll mention it because it's, inshallah, it will be a success story here, inshallah. So risk management, this was one of the items that the ECES report said this was one of the higher priorities. Risk management is so instead of inspecting and testing every single item that comes into the country, you look at several criteria: who the importer is, the exporter, look at the paperwork, and determine whether this is likely to be on the customs side, whether there's going to be fraud. Is it misclassified? Is the valuation not correct? Customs, in its law, which was also issued just relatively recently, and its executive regulations, they do say that customs can implement risk management, and there is some progress. I can't say that there's still a lot of improvement that needs to be done on that side, but the one good sign is that a couple of months after that report was done, and one of the panelists was the head of GOIC, we know, for the PPA presentations, and other senior officials, including the head of customs and others. So a regulation was issued that said that GOIC, the General Organization for Export-Import Control, can implement risk management for non-food imports. And this is good. Right after that, so a couple weeks after the decree was issued, we worked with them to look at best international practices and how we would go about issuing that. So I think, inshallah, that within the next year or so, we're gonna start to see some real progress. One thing that I really wish to see, there are a lot of other issues, and again, I would send you to the report to take a look at. One of the major issues is NAFISA. So I think all of you are familiar with NAFISA. There are a lot of issues within just NAFISA. Right after the presentation on the BPA, we went and visited MTS, the implementers of NAFISA. Actually, very impressive kind of presentation. And what they suffer from is not so much the lack of willingness to make the changes, but it comes back to the interagency coordination. If they had people that they could work with that would implement these reforms and be synchronized across the government, then these things can happen. I happened to work in, I lived in Jakarta for 3 years, and my job was to help connect the countries of ASEAN. This is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. There's 10 of them. This is like Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, Cambodia, etc. And it's tried to connect them. So talk about trade connectivity. It's tried to connect their individual national single windows, and through an IT connectivity system, all the agencies are involved, and they're all talking to the private sector. And yes, there are always issues of coordination. Is trade ministry the lead, the Ministry of Finance the lead, or some sort of thing? But there is inevitably a coordination among these countries that makes the connectivity happen. So in several of these ASEAN countries, what you have for the single window, or the aim, and that's the international best practice definition, is a single window should be the single entry point where a trader goes in to fulfill all regulatory requirements connected with trade. And if the single window is electronic, all the data should be entered only once. So Yani, just imagine if you're a trader here and you have to submit a license to this ministry and a permit to this other ministry and something else, certificate of origin or something else, and you always have to re-enter this data. It's manual, electronic, but you have to keep re-entering it. So the idea here, and if I were pushing, and we are pushing as much as we can, but if I'm pushing, I would want trader to be able to come to this one platform, just come to this one platform to fulfill all the trade requirements. And this will be a dream. You're sitting at your computer and you're doing everything as much as you can electronically. Internal versus external trade, I don't know, again, if I understood the question, I mean, obviously, here we are seeing a lot of companies who are satisfied, trading or selling products domestically, not being interested in exporting. And whether that's just lack of interest in exporting. I'm happy enough selling my products domestically, and I'm making good money. Why should I bother? Maybe that's one. But what I'm worried about is people who want to export. They have the desire, but they are blocked by the complexity of the process, and that one is a lot more bothersome. See what else. So Dr. Maha's question. I meant to go back to that one earlier. So do we see reform happening? I think I mentioned, some of the things that seem to be happening on risk management. We're pushing on a couple of others as discreetly as we can, but it will not happen without what we were discussing in the hallway. It just needs to be leadership. There needs to be, somebody that's bringing people together. In Indonesia, in even Vietnam, in Laos, they all have an interagency trade facilitation committee, and we saw this actually in the days when we were here before, back in the 2000s. Something like that existed here. But the idea is you have usually the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Trade. They usually at the top, the ministers themselves, and they coordinate an agency body made up of the ministers, and includes the private sector, and they set the vision for trade, or for trade policy, for trade facilitation, and that leadership is needed to make any of this happen. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I would want, this is another thing that I saw in Vietnam, and I've talked to Dr. Abdel about this as well, is every year Vietnam does a survey of the private sector, of the businesses, to tell them, hey, how is the government doing on trade reform? So call it a policy adoption kind of survey. So this happens every year. And they sort of score the government on whether a reform that's been talked about is actually happening. Are we implementing risk management in the way that we want? Is duty drawback reformed? Is the single window working, and etc. So I think there needs to be a process by which. So we talked about the reform agenda from the Federation of Egyptian Industries. There is a reform agenda. Now we have to be able to hold people's feet, the policymakers' feet to the fire, to make sure that this that the reform is actually happening. Let's see. I'm not sure that I completely. Sorry, sir. The question on the Indo-Pacific economic. What was the question again?
Is a rather open question, is because this is just emerged, right, during the G20 India. But since we are reaching the end of the negotiations also regarding the membership of the African Free Trade Agreement, how much in the context of the next 24 months and ahead of a sort of all Africa presidency of the G20 in 25, with South Africa chairing the G20 and the African Union becoming a full member of the G20 for the second year, how this might or not help create or foster a stronger consensus within the G20 than looking at the Western positions on one hand and other positions on the other hand. It's a very open question.
Very difficult to answer too. We'll move to Ambassador Suri. Maybe he has an answer to this last question, and you go back to all the questions that you might want to address. Go ahead.
Thank you. India doesn't have a great track record when it comes to negotiating multilateral trade agreements. And this one also, we are getting into it in bits and pieces. So I think, a former Indian diplomat is probably the wrong person to address this question too. But I did want to come to the point about CBAM, and I know that Ms. Rania addressed it. It is a big concern in India as well. And it is seen by industry very much as a non-tariff barrier. And while India's kind of registered its opposition to the Europeans, but there's also a recognition that at one level, it is a reality that we have to deal with. And at another level, it's a responsibility for us to try and address those sectors like steel and cement and so on, which have fairly high emissions. At one level, there is talk that will green hydrogen be the silver bullet that enables these hard to abate sectors to become more neutral. Within what time frame? How long will it take before the kind of price decreases that we saw, or Moore's law that we saw in solar, starts applying to green hydrogen? When do the economies of scale kick in? And what companies like Tata Steel and so on are saying is this is exactly where the climate finance comes in. This is where green transitions come in to enable companies like theirs to make the transition to cleaner fuels and still stay viable, at least until the costs of those new green fuels comes in. So it's a real issue which is now staring some of the large sectors of industry in the face. On the corridor, I would just add that, I totally agree with what the lady was saying. I think as we look at the way trade is going in the future, you might see data and energy flows become as important almost as the flows of physical goods. I give you an example that India's IT exports industry is $250 billion. And that's without anything moving physically from one domain to another. And finally, I think the question about AGOA came up. And I just thought I'd mention, even though the question is not directed to me, that I was in South Africa last week. And a couple of friends that I was speaking with were seriously concerned that the hardline position that the South Africans have taken on Israel in the context of Gaza could recoil on them in the form of AGOA, which is a very tough nut to crack. So I just thought I'd leave it there with you.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Suri, and with that we come to a conclusion for our panel. And please put your hands together for a warm round of applause for all panelists. Thank you very much.